Hello and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you join us today for the LinkedIn webinar, Building a Data-Driven Customer-Focused Business. Our presenters today are Russell Glass and Nick Panay. Russ is Head of Products for LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. He's formerly founder, president, and CEO of Bizzo, a B2B audience marketing and data platform. He is also the co-author of The Big Data-Driven Business, a book about how companies can use big data to drive results. Nick joined CSC about 3 years ago as Head of Digital Marketing and Global Brand. His areas of responsibility include digital marketing, global brand management, social media, demand center, and ABM, among others. Nick has 20-plus years experience in the technology industry and was named to the list of 2013's top 25 digital marketers by B2B magazine. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We invite you to join the conversation and share your thoughts on Twitter. We'll be using the hashtag BigDataBiz. We also invite you to ask the speakers any questions you might have about big data using the Q&A box. We'll take time to discuss those questions during the Q&A portion following our speaker presentations. We will also be sending a recording of the webinar along with the slides to you via email following the event. Now, without further ado, I'll pass things to you, Russ.
Hey, thanks, Cassandra. Really appreciate it. So thanks, everybody, for joining. Really excited to be here today with Nick. We wrote this book, The Big Data-Driven Business, recently, and the whole concept of the book was that we, over the last sort of 6-7 years, have been working with a lot of marketers. And when we broke down those marketers, it was kind of a group of 3 different cohorts. There was 10% that were really doing this right, really using data to build a customer-focused business and sort of totally changing the trajectory of their business. And then the other 90%, there was kind of this split between 45% that wanted to build a more data-driven customer-focused business, but they didn't really know how to get started. They were kind of frozen. And the other 45% were just skeptics. So we wrote this book about the 10%, and I'm so excited to have Nick here because Nick is very much the sort of head of the class of that 10%. And I'm going to talk about some examples of companies that have been successful. One of the primary examples we use in the book is CSC, led by Nick, in the efforts that they've driven there and how Nick did it, I think are going to be very instructive. So before we get there, though, a little bit of background on what's happened over the past, let's say decade or so that's led to this. And we'll go back even farther than that, right? So one of my favorite cartoons growing up was the Jetsons. And I used to love this notion of, George would wake up in the morning to his alarm clock, which knew what time he got up. He would be whisked into the shower. His favorite pair of clothes was put on. He'd be whisked in front of breakfast. His favorite breakfast would be served in front of him. He would be whisked to his car. The radio would be set to his favorite radio station. He'd be brought exactly where he wanted to go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Everything was personalized and automated for George. And what's so interesting about that is we're actually not too far from scenarios like this, right? For those of you who have used products like Waze, right, that just knows, the mapping product on a phone, and all of a sudden it'll bring up a dialogue that says, hey, are you headed to the office, right? It's able to use data and your historical patterns of where you've come from and gone to and the time of day to determine that you're likely going to the office, and so it's going to create a better experience for you. This is all happening in real time today. All of this data is being collected, analyzed, gathered in a way that can lead to these much better experiences. And, over the past about 30 years since Gordon Moore founded Intel, and he predicted that, the number of transistors on the chip would double approximately every 2 years, he was actually wrong. It was actually every 18 months or so that this has doubled. But that has led to these incredible opportunities to where today, on your cell phone, you have 1,000 times the power that sent Apollo 11 to the moon, right? The NSA today is gathering about 6 times the volume of the Library of Congress every single day. And the exhaust that your customers are creating on the internet is leading to these incredible opportunities that we call big data, right? So this notion of how do you use all of this exhaust, all of this digital body language, as Steve Woods at Eloquent called it, to create better experiences for your customers. And it's really important when we talk about data-driven, customer-focused business. You know, big data can sound very scary. It can sound kind of like this amorphous, and a lot of people, like I said, are skeptical about it, this sort of concept that's easy to be skeptical about. But what we really mean is, how do you get ultra customer focused? How do you really understand how to change the way your customer interacts with your brand, and in doing so, change the trajectory of your business? As we were writing the book, we talked to Jeffrey Moore quite a bit, and he's, you know, kind of a marketing guru. He wrote Crossing the Chasm, Inside the Tornado. And his argument that he made was that it's the most disruptive business force there is. And, you know, I think in a lot of ways, with the speed that it's able to disrupt businesses and create sort of Goliaths from Davids, it may be the most disruptive economic force that there ever has been, if, as a company, you can start to take advantage of it. So a couple of examples of, you know, well-known companies that have taken advantage of it. One is Amazon, right? So if you think about the Amazon experience, in effect, everybody has a totally unique experience on Amazon compared to, you know, most of what the websites you go to that are very, very static, right? You see the exact same thing that I would see. When I go to Amazon today, I see things like diapers. I see, you know, things like golf clubs. I see things that I have shown an interest in the past. I've either bought or I haven't bought. I see things that people who have bought the same things I have bought have also bought. And that experience is created uniquely for me. You compare that to that sort of customer centricity to what a Borders said, right, about a decade ago. Oh, you know, consumers will always want to touch and feel the books that they're buying. They will always want to go into a store. And of course, that was completely wrong, and really did ignore what the data was showing about customers and about what they actually wanted. Amazon came from, you know, nothing in this little online bookseller in 1996 to this massive powerhouse, obviously, largest retailer online today. Another great example, slightly more recent but similar story, is Netflix. So when Reed Hastings founded Netflix, I mean, if you think about it, he basically founded it on a customer-first principle. And, you know, like everybody else at the time, if you remember those old, like, crazy late fees that would happen when you would not return your tape on time, right? So, you know, 3 times the cost of the rental would be the late fee. If you didn't return it at all, it would be like $100 for the videotape that you didn't return. Netflix came along after Reed had one of these late fees and said, you know, there's got to be a better way to do this. And he basically changed the model to where there is no late fees. You can keep it as long as you want, but you can only have a certain amount out at one time. And actually, after a couple years of some pretty good success, but he was running out of money, he was looking to raise money, and he went to Blockbuster and he said, hey, I want you to go 50-50 with me on this enterprise. I think it's the new way it's going to happen. I think it's going to be disruptive of your current business. And of course, you know, Blockbuster said, no way, this will never be successful. And like Borders, they ignored what the customers were telling them, right? They ignored what the data was clearly showing them. So Netflix grows up. But another great example of how Netflix is customer first is the story of the production of House of Cards, which, for those of you who haven't seen it, I think most probably have at this point, but is a program that was produced by Netflix and has been wildly successful. It's the first time Netflix ever did any sort of original programming. And they made a $100 million bet on that show, which other producers, about 7 other producers, had all declined. So all the experts basically said, this is not a win. Netflix, somebody who's never done anything like this before, said, we're going to make a $100 million bet on this. So how did they do it? They did it by looking at their data, right? So they looked into their customer files and realized that their customers really liked Kevin Spacey, really liked films that were directed by the guy that directed House of Cards. They put all of this together. They saw that there was actually a lot of people who had downloaded the British version of House of Cards. And by using all of that big data, they saw an intersection that basically said, you know what, this is actually a very good bet for us because we believe our audience is going to like this program. And so, obviously, the rest is history, and now they've become a multi-time producer of series like this. So, you know, you really can today become, you can be a David. You can disrupt Goliath. And those are a couple of examples, but obviously there's tons more that, you know, Google and Alta Vista and Salesforce versus Siebel, right? The ability to take really smart, customer-centric views of the world and use that to disrupt industries. And so the key thing to note, I think, and which we're going to get into as we start talking about specific examples, is that if you're small, there's never been a better time to disrupt big companies. And if you're big, there's never been, you know, a scarier time when you can really constantly be disrupted if you're not very focused on your customer and what that data is telling you, and how do you create an organization and a business around that. You know, what's so interesting about this is that there's been the desire to get here and skepticism for the last, 50 years. This is the great quote that we hear all the time out there. John Wanamaker, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. You know, part of the argument that we make in the book is that that's actually no longer a valid quote, right? That is sort of a vestige of the old way of doing things, and that measurement today is such that, for very inexpensive storage costs, very inexpensive processing costs, you actually should know which half of your marketing is working. And yet the skepticism has been around for a long time, so some of the cultural change required, which Nick is going to touch on, is critical to getting this right. I love Mad Men, another show that I've gotten into. And in the first episode, Don Draper is in a client meeting, and it's with Lucky Strike, and someone brings him all this data about the customer, right, about what the customers are saying. And he in this sort of fit of drama, takes the report and throws it in the trash bin, right, this report about what customers are saying. And then he comes up and, he has this flash of, it's toasted, right? And this is very much how things used to be done, right, where the creatives and the creative minds were the ones who sort of drove brands and how consumers perceived brands, not the data. Later on, season 7 now, they bring this big computer into the agency, this IBM 360. It's called the Monolith, this episode. And same sort of thing, right? Everybody in the agency reacts in this very oh, this is the end of us kind of a way, that all this data is going to put us all out of work. And, so the skepticism has been around for a long time. But if you can change that culture and, again, be the sort of 10% that really embrace customer centricity and understanding who your customers really are and how do you act on that, you can sort of change the trajectory of your business. So we'll give a couple examples of how certain organizations are using data to boost their performance. We'll turn it over to Nick to talk about specifically in detail how CSC has thought about this, and then we'll give some tips and tricks to how you can get started within your organization as well. So we'll start with the Obama campaign. So really interesting case study here. So in 2008, the Obama campaign was competing against Hillary Clinton in the primaries. They were way behind, and they were out of money. And so they really needed success in the spend of the marketing campaigns that they were putting out there. And they made a big bet on a video campaign that would be sent out via email to help drive fundraising. And all the pundits at the Obama campaign basically said, this video, let's call it video A, is by far our favorite video. This is the one we should go with. And the guy who ran digital there at the time, a guy named Dan Soroker, who now has founded a company called Optimizely to do what he did here for the masses, basically said, well, why don't we just test it? Why don't we put a bunch of them out there and figure out which one performs the best? And so that's what they did. They A/B tested these. And what's so fascinating about it is that the one that pundits selected actually ended up dead last in the 24 iterations. The one that was very low on their list ended up being the highest performer. They raised an additional $60 million as part of that campaign. And in a lot of ways, you could make the argument that $60 million changed the trajectory of the election. So incredible example of the power of just simple A/B testing. Another example, predictive analytics. So, just as A/B testing today has gotten so inexpensive, basically free, that there's no reason not to do it. And there's so much customer centricity and learning that can come out of A/B testing. And the platforms are so inexpensive to get going on that everybody really should be doing it. Predictive analytics is rapidly getting to that point as well. And so really interesting case study here where Juniper basically said, we're trying to understand more about our prospects. And so we're going to take a look at all of the data we have in our CRM systems and see if we can correlate the value of our customers. So if we look at our high lifetime value customers, what attributes do they have in common? And so they use a predictive engine called Lattice Engines. And basically, an incredible set of insights came out of this. One really interesting one was that it turned out that the prospects most likely to buy routers had recently signed a lease for a new office space, right? So an insight that in sort of retrospect, you say, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? I can see how that would be the case. But without using this kind of analysis and this kind of big data approach to understanding the customer more thoroughly, they never would have come up with this insight that we should be targeting companies that have recently signed a lease for new office space. And this is the kind of intelligence. Again, there are predictive analytics companies now that you can get started with for free and test it out for 30 days before making a longer-term investment and a commitment. So a couple of examples there. I'm going to turn it over to Nick now to talk about not only some examples with CSC, but how he's gone about changing that culture to move to data-driven and customer centricity.
Thank you so much, Russ. I appreciate it, and great to be on this webinar with you. It's a great pleasure, great honor. Let me start by saying this, and let me kind of pivot off of something that Russ said earlier, and that is that big data or data-driven marketing is indeed a great equalizer. It is a great equalizer between the big spenders and the more thrifty, more frugal spenders. And I will tell you, for a $14 billion, 80,000 employee company that we fall in the latter category of thrifty spenders. So our view from the very beginning was that we have a great opportunity to use technology and smarts to equalize the big spenders out there, and we kind of compete with quite a few of them. So it's a very noisy marketplace. So it truly is a fantastic opportunity for that, and it is also a great opportunity to build those relationships with sales. The reality is, if you've been in marketing for a long time, and I have been, the reality is that marketing is always in a fight for relevance. If you think about it, always trying to be relevant to say, trying to add that value to the front sales organizations, because at the end of the day, that's what kind of makes the cash register ring. And this, again, is an opportunity for us to add tremendous value, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And what I'll share in my time is some of our key learnings. We've been at this journey for about 3 years now. I will tell you, it is called a journey for a reason. It doesn't end. If you think you're ever done, you're done, but in a bad way. There's always going to be some new technology, some new methodology, a new way of thinking about it, and that's what makes it exciting and unique. But again, the data-driven marketing as a discipline, I think, is becoming a very, very exciting space for all of us. So basically, we'll talk about some of those key building criteria or design criteria as you go through your own digital transformation journey. The first thing I will say is there's no such thing as digital marketing anymore. It is marketing in the digital age, which basically means, yes, digital marketing is usually the function that has oversight over these great tools and capabilities and big data assets and so forth. But at the end of the day, the value is derived well outside of digital marketing. It's derived in every, really touch point in the company. Some of the primary ones being, in sales operations, in field, in field sales, in corporate communications. There's so much value that we can derive, package, and deliver to these organizations that are, in essence, the front-facing or the market-facing organizations. But I challenge anyone to really find any interaction in marketing that doesn't have a digital element. It's all digital. At some level. So we live in a very, very happy time, at least from my perspective, where all of these digital signals are there for the taking. And frankly, it's a crime against humanity, the way I see it, not to use this digital exhaust that Russ called it, or digital trail that is left out there. And again, that's what makes it such a wonderful opportunity. And like I said, for us at CSC, everything is interesting and important, and everything is unique in its own way. But at the end of the day, you have to move the needle. And the way you move the needle is to establish a strong foundation of trust with sales so that the value can be transferred. The knowledge, the value can be transferred. It's not enough for us in marketing to have all this great knowledge and be happy about it and do award-winning campaigns. It clearly has to make a difference and say a marketing organization. So therefore, that stitch, that interface between sales and marketing is hugely important, and again, very, very much helped by the advent of data-driven. So first thing we always have to do, and I do that all the time, is stop for a second and think that it is all about the people. All of this technology that we're about to talk about, and the infrastructure and the tools, these are all great, but they're simply science experiments unless you have the right people that apply a combination of intelligence and creativity to really make the most out of these digital tools. Anyone can go procure predictive modeling functionality from one vendor, marketing automation from another, in essence, go light up all of those tools. But unless you have the right people that know what to do with those tools, it's not going to be a very pleasant experience at the end. So we started our journey with getting the right people. And there was a great phrase that I saw really in a book called How Google Works by Eric Schmidt, and he used the term smart creatives, and I think it's the best description of these folks out there. They do combine really both the left side of the brain and the right side in one person. They're people who understand and appreciate and leverage technology to its maximum degree, but they understand the art of it as well. They understand creative approaches. They understand sales to marketing, chemistry and interactions, the more subtle elements of marketing. So the art and science together in one person is really what we're looking for when we hire, and that was a very, very key part of our success story so far, is really bringing the right people. And I will say that there is a misnomer out there that The only right people are what we call the digital natives, people that were born digital and they're of the generation. They're absolutely critical. However, there are folks out there that I call the digital migrants, people that grew up in traditional marketing environments, but jumped into the new world with the digital tools as well. And what they provide is, again, the subtle understanding of the chemistry between sales and marketing and the importance of the art of marketing as well. So there's a combination of digital natives and digital migrants that I would say are very, very important in this exercise. Having said that, which again is the first building block before we even start thinking about technology, we live again in a very interesting, unique time in that, unlike previous times where we had to buy these technologies and there were islands of productivity and people had to run around with CD-ROMs out revs, and they were sitting in the data center somewhere in their headquarters, those days are gone. So these are cloud-enabled infrastructures. They're fluid, meaning the barriers of entry for new tools are relatively low. And also the reverse holds true. If there's a technology element or a vendor that's not doing the job for you, it's not detrimental to unplug them and plug something else in because it's all cloud connectors and cloud-enabled infrastructure. So we have built a pretty sophisticated infrastructure at CSC. At the center of it is our CMS, which happens to be a custom CMS, but there's plenty of fantastic CMSs out there. But that is our core brain, so to speak, and it's connected, as you can see, with the web, marketing automation tools, analytics, social advertising. At the end of the day, the lines that you see are actual integration lines between all the systems via cloud connectors. There's 53 or 54 tools from 37 companies in this infrastructure. And whenever I tell that to executive management, they almost faint, or they think I'm spending pretty much the entire marketing budget on this, and it's absolutely not the case at all. It's highly, highly efficient because it's cloud-connected infrastructures, and again, it allows us a lot of what I'm about to talk about. It's very, very important to have these integration points and to have a best-in-breed mentality. Do not get locked in to any one vendor. If there's any one vendor out there that thinks that they have a solution for all these technologies in one shop, I would question that. At this point, at least in time, that does not exist. There's great vendors with great aggregation of technologies, but at the end of the day, you have to deal with multiple technologies, and therefore integration is very, very important. Now, assuming you have that, which I call kind of the first layer of the cake, the infrastructure piece, again, that's not enough. You really have to think about processes, how data flows from one system to another, how that data translates to business rules is, again, one of those most important exercises that you will spend most of I spend most of my time in the beginning building these business processes that I did integrating Eloqua or Adobe or any one of the tools that we have to one another. That was the easy part. The harder part is to get people and systems to work together. So I've developed, in essence, these playbooks of common understanding, almost like an SLA, of what the demand center processes are, how a campaign is launched, how everything is tagged, also on csc.com, how everything gets structured. Why is that important for big data? Because at the end of the day, big data is all about little data at the very beginning of it. Before big data becomes big, there's all kinds of little millions and millions of data points that are forming and coming into this big data bucket. And if they come in the wrong way and not coded appropriately and not structured appropriately, you'll have a much more difficult time at the end. So making sure that you have your demand center processes correct, you have your web content processes correct, people are lining up behind a consistent way of doing things in marketing. Even more important between marketing and sales, which, as we all know, is one of the most important handoffs in business. Having an SLA, a system, basically just a common dictionary, not even a system, a common dictionary that says, this is what a marketing lead looks like. This is what a marketing qualified lead looks like. These are the systems that we agree will take the leads and how they will progress through the funnel and all of that. those things are very important. And again, at the end, if not done correctly, no matter how sophisticated your big data approach is, it's going to be dealing with bad data coming in. Okay, so it's going to be big bad data, which is not a good thing. So assuming we have that in place, you've got to measure everything. And again, we live in a world where everything is, I don't say everything, but pretty much the majority of what you need to be measured can be measured. And I always say, if you can't measure it, don't do it or don't invest in it. Therefore, we went and built an aggregated dashboard that is a live, real-time dashboard that takes feeds from all the different systems. Everything that we have has its own mini dashboard, but of course, you don't want to be sending people to 1,000 different dashboards. You want to aggregate everything into one. You want to line it up with KPIs that people kind of basically align their work around. And we've done that, and I can tell you with certainty that has been probably one of our best investments in time and effort, because it gives you a single version of the truth. One place where you see how many leads a particular campaign has delivered, you see how many likes and shares, you see how many dollars in the pipeline, you see where your customers are going, all of that in one place. It saves you so much time and energy, and it lets you focus your activities on the true analytics and big data that comes after that. One element of big data value for us is once we gather all this information, we have created a personalization model. So as an individual comes to our website, whether they register or not, obviously we identify them as an individual, and we gather information about their usage on the website. We combine that information with information we have about what company they're associated with via a reverse IP address, and then we bring as much information as we can in one basically personalization engine that lines up the content we have available with what we believe that particular user is interested in based on behavior. So that is one basic example of big data value, is you use it to predict what assets would be most useful to users. And as people come to the website, you see here we have like a slide out tray that simply says, hey, you may be interested in this content. Now, other people have been doing that, again, in B2C, and, example of, Netflix, of course, and Amazon has been doing that in very unique ways, but very difficult to see this kind of thing in a B2B environment. And we were happy to be able to do something like that. And again, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can be done. Some other things, and we talked about how important it is to arm sales with knowledge and flood them with value from marketing. We have something we call ABM, or account-based marketing, whereas in essence, looking at the large accounts, the strategic accounts as a market of one. Within that discipline, we have a number of tools that, again, we use with big data approaches to deliver value to sales. So starting from left side, we do, for example, an influencer profile. So we take the executives from these large accounts, and we ensure that we do a deep dive on everything we can learn about them from all these digital signals, not only web behavior, but also social behavior. Obviously, we're a great big fan of social media, and LinkedIn specifically. We use LinkedIn Navigator, and we find who else in the sales organization is connected to these people. We do an entire 360 profile in terms of where these folks have been, whether it's inside CSC.com or outside, and we provide these digital profiles. That is, again, an example of big data, but packaged correctly in a digestible way for sales. In the middle, you see the deal predictor. That is pure and simple predictive. Actually, I shouldn't say simple because it's not, but it's a pure predictive model that we call deal predictor. Is simply looking at a number of data points from outside the business, inside the business, and it does look-alike model knowing what a usual success event looks like for that customer. Any success event, meaning a sale or an RFP, has usually some elements that precede it. So when the system starts to see those elements appear, it makes a calculation that, hey, this particular customer may be looking to buy something again because we've seen this behavior before. So we've done this in close collaboration with a great partner of ours named 6 Sense is the name of the company, and there's many others out there. Lattice Engines is another great vendor as well. This is our partner, and we're actually piloting that for sales teams as we speak. And then finally, what you see there on the right is, again, using reverse IP, we're able to aggregate the digital footsteps of not just individuals. We do that already for using Eloqua, for example, and some other tools. We look at individuals, but this is aggregating at the business level. As we all know, B2B buying behavior is a group sport. It's not an individual sport. It's usually a buying committee that buys things. So if you just stay just focused on an individual and what they're doing, you may be missing the tree for the forest, or the forest for the tree. So this aggregates, for example, a single company and tells you where the company users in general are going to. Again, a simple example of packaging knowledge from a big data standpoint, delivering that to sales. Imagine if you're the salesperson and marketing comes to you and says, hey, in general, your account was all silent for the last 3 months, and the last month they were all over this particular solution area, or they were all over this particular download that talks about big data or whatever it may talk about. So it's great intelligence that the sales team truly appreciates. Finally, all of these things that we talked about, all of these interactions and data streams and click streams, you don't want them to go to waste. It's almost like you don't want any of this information to go to waste. You don't want to give reports that basically get consumed once and then shelved. You want that information to keep giving, maybe in a different context at a different time. So what we do is we have actually set up our own big data instance. We have the unfair advantage, of course, of being a company that sells big data solutions. We have our own big data practice. We set up an actual Hadoop data, and we basically, lack of a better term, we dump everything we know into this database. And of course, both structured and unstructured data. And then we can answer great questions like, hey, what is the optimal path to become a marketing qualified lead? Or what is unique about the users that come to this particular solution area? What makes them different? What can we learn about them and compare that information to other users on the website? It's almost like you're not limited at all. The only limit is your imagination in terms of what questions you can ask, because again, the data points are there. So that is our own big data beast, and we feed it on a daily basis. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Russ. Maybe finish us off, and I can go to Q&A later on. Russ?
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Great examples and great understanding of how you guys are doing what you're doing. Yeah. So the idea now will be, how do we get going, right? How do we get started in changing our organizations? And again, I want to reinforce this notion of a lot of this comes down to being customer centric. And so one of the examples I like to give is, when I call the airlines, if you call American now, if you're a frequent flyer, instead of getting, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 for this, right? Pretty much a horrible experience. You get, hello, Mr. Russell Glass. We recognized your phone number. Are you calling about your flight this afternoon, right? So incredible customer-centric experience. And if you think about what they had to do to create that experience, it was databases from around the company, right? They had to take a customer account database, and they had to take a flight schedule database, and they had to take, probably a frequent flyer database and a scheduling database, a reservations database, and bring all those together. And the way they did that was being customer-centric, right? They had a very specific use case. How do we create a better experience for our customers by bringing all these things together? And that is how I see a lot of companies thinking about how do you get these different disparate teams to work together by starting with the customer and starting with who they are. So some sort of tips and tricks here, right? Principle 1, determine what you know, want to know, and I would add, and the experience you want to create for your customer, right? How do you create a great experience, and then what do you have to do to create it, right? That's a first big step, because if you understand your customer, the persona, who they are, what they care about, why they need your products and services, at a fundamental level, that'll help you make good decisions about the different data sets you need to create those experiences. Number 2, start small. And what I've seen here is that a lot of companies fail at this because they think too big, right? They try to bite off too much instead of starting small and getting some early wins. Because what happens is with early wins, with small wins even, you can go back to your boss, others at the company, and show how those wins change the trajectory. And you can extrapolate out and say, well, if we can just do these wins against more activities, you can start to show how this could make a big effect on the business. I also think it's really important that you talk in revenue. And what I mean by that is revenue is the universal language of a business. If you're talking too much in marketing speak, so click-through rates, CPCs, MQLs, you're going to get a lot of blank stares. If you talk in revenue terms, what does all this mean to the revenue of the organization? Everybody's on the same page now, right? And so I would highly recommend you talk in revenue terms. The third principle here, you have to invest in technology. Part of what makes big data is that you can't manage this with a spreadsheet, right? You can't manage this with eyeballing. You really need technology in order to both organize this information and deliver insights and better experiences for your customers. So be prudent about it, but you have to be willing and comfortable with making investments to move the needle here. Principle number 5, Nick talked a lot about this. I love that concept of smart creatives. You got to hire the right people, right? You have to, it doesn't mean they have to be quants, right? It doesn't mean they have to be, spending their entire lives in a spreadsheet, but it does mean that they're comfortable with the concept of data and that the creative concepts they have may not be the best ones if data comes back and shows that they're not the best ones. And then finally, test, measure. Like I said before, there's really no reason at this point in time not to be A/B testing everything you do. And, a lot of times people will say, well, it takes more creative, there's more effort to do that. Change something simple. Like literally, change the button, change the headline. You will learn and improve customer experience just from starting very small and starting to A/B test, because you're allowing the customers to vote basically on which ones they prefer. And over time, even with small approaches, you'll get good data out of it. You'll be able to prove to people how this kind of work can move the needle. You can talk about it in revenue terms and get more budget to do more of it. So that's about it for the presentation, and we thought we'd open it up to some questions. So I'll turn it over to Cass to help us.
Thanks, guys. We've had a few questions coming in terms of getting buy-in from other departments. So I'll start with the first one, Nick. I understand the value of A/B testing, but I have had a tough time convincing those I work with due to bandwidth and time constraints. Any suggestions to get around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I concur with Russell's point, by the way. I am a very strong believer and a big user of it. And as a matter of fact, I challenged my team to actually give me a reason not to do a test, and only then would they be allowed not to do a test, right? We actually start with a default position that says you will test. And one of the best ways to really prove this out is, number one, it doesn't take significant amounts of time, exactly as Russell said. It doesn't mean you're going to do a whole new creative, you're going to shift some things around. And there's so many variables that no matter how smart we think we are, the crowd always outsmarts us. They always click on something you thought they're not going to click, or they go for a creative you thought they're not going to go for. So the best way to do it is to actually do a test and then bring the 3 or 4 options to your manager, the person who's not sold yet, and ask them to predict where they think the actual highest performance was. And I can almost guarantee you, if they get the right one, that's great, but chances are you're going to be able to make your point that, look, there's a significant difference in variation in how these users behave, and with very minor investment in time, you can get the click-through rate even just a notch higher. With the kind of volumes that we're talking about, it proves itself out very easily from a financial standpoint. It's really not much of an investment in time and a huge payout potential at the end, even just by fine-tuning minor things.
Great. Another one in terms of, you discussed a little bit, Nick, about providing the sales team with knowledge to better do their job. Did you have any trouble, getting them to adopt some of those reporting tools that you were able to provide them?
Yes, plenty of trouble. If anyone tells you they don't have trouble getting the attention of the sales team, they're probably lying. It doesn't matter how cool a shiny object it is. You're always kind of fighting against the grain with sales. But the beauty of what we have in front of us now is that all you need is really the time to get in front of them and show them some of these things. If you try to describe it via email or anything like that, it's just not going to fly. But for example, ABM, account-based marketing, is some of the value that we provide through some of these reports that aggregate how their company behaves. The suggestion I have is take their company, the thing that they care about the most, not big general questions, but take their company, their users, show them some of this technology as it relates to their particular environment. Sales folks love them to death. They're coin operated, right? If they see the direct correlation to revenue in their account, they'll pay attention.
Great, thanks. Russ, this next one I'll give to you. How does big data relate to the new B2B sales cycle you kind of referenced in the beginning, when customers are engaging later in the sales process?
Yeah, well, I think it just makes this a lot more important in a lot of ways, right? So basically what we're seeing out there is that whereas historically customers, engage very early on in sales cycles with salespeople or with marketers directly, now they're doing all their own research, right? They're going to Google, they're going to comparison sites, they're going to social networks, they're talking to their friends, et cetera. And so what that implies is that marketers have to be in that conversation much earlier in the process, right? They have to be thinking about, how do I get my messages across these different channels and across these different touch points much earlier in that sales cycle. And Google did some research actually that showed that the average buyer is going to consume 10 pieces of content before they've made a decision. And so the marketer's job is, how do I get that content out there in front of my target audiences early enough in that sales cycle to move perception and move the needle and make it a less risky decision for them to engage with my brand.
Great, thanks. Another one for you, Russ. Can small companies gain an advantage with data-driven marketing, and how so?
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, if you talk about sort of the notion of David versus Goliath, right? I think the biggest advantage is for small companies. And the reason is that as the cost of storage has gone down so precipitously, it's actually down 28 million x over the last 30 years. And the cost of processing power has gone down so precipitously. It's now almost free for a small business to get started doing the kind of analytics that before were only available to big companies with big teams. And so that alone levels the playing field in a way that a small business who's smart about investing in this kind of capability can not only level the playing field, but accelerate beyond the big guys that are slower to react to some of these trends.
Great. Next one, Nick, I'll get to you. How do you convince your leadership that data-driven marketing is worth pursuing?
Well, like I said in my presentation, I think what is key here is to measure everything and show the actual numbers and information that traditionally was not available to the business. The fact that we have, for example, real-time data, right, that you can almost ask any question about, ROI for particular marketing campaigns, or our content, or which content is performing well and which isn't, or how social media is doing, all in one place. At the end of the day, executives see the value of being able to optimize investment. That's really what they care about. Is I'll give you $1 in marketing. You're going to make the most of that. You're going to give me back, $100. And how are you going to do that? And usually this question and answer without the backup of data is very theoretical and kind of people's eyes glaze over. You can talk all you want about the value of marketing, but until you show me the numbers, I'm not as interested. So I think an investment in dashboards, and there's fantastic tools and capabilities now. Again, assuming you code your data correctly and your campaign processes have strong discipline, you'll be able to demonstrate the value simply by answering questions about the investments that are being made in marketing and what's coming on those investments. I think that's a great way to think about it.
Another one for you, Nick, talks of building out your team. How are you finding the right people, sort of a blend of the creative and the left-brained employees you need to support that?
Yeah, thankfully, we have tools like LinkedIn and other places where, all kidding aside, it's not a shameless plug for LinkedIn, but I do spend a lot of time asking my network about people that they feel are A players. I mean, that's where I usually start. I mean, of course, we have HR and recruiting helps us, but, I have a lot more luck basically going to my network and saying, who have you worked with that you believe is a player in this particular field with this particular skill sets? So usually that's what I do. And the goodness of having tools like this available to us is that people are known entities now. In the older days, you had a resume and what we used to call references, like could have been your cousin and your friend from the neighborhood. I have no idea who these people are. Whereas on LinkedIn or tools like that, I'm able to look at who you know and who I know in common. I can ask people about you. So that's usually, I use actually social media in a big way. And the other thing I do is we work with a lot of very smart vendors, whether they're technology vendors or agencies. We're very particular about the relationships we create. And usually great people come and go through those doors. So we also ask our agencies and our technology vendors of great people that are ready to move on to something else or have gone through their doors into somewhere else, and that way we go find them. That's usually what I do.
Awesome. We have time for about one more question, and Russ, I'll end this with you. What is the one piece of advice you have for marketers trying to leverage big data?
I would really say start small and start with A/B testing. Really easy, really straightforward, requires almost zero budget, and it allows you to get those wins that you can start to distribute through the organization to get bigger budgets over time.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Russ and Nick, for presenting today, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. Check your inbox for the recording and the slides. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.